Frontier widow hides a wounded Navajo outlaw. Now their fates are forever tied. He was bleeding in the moonlight. She was holding a rifle with trembling hands. A white widow, a Navajo outlaw. She had no reason to save him, except that her heart remembered something her mind had buried. What makes a woman risk everything for a stranger? And what if that stranger carries a secret that could burn the entire town to the ground? This is Red Mesa, Arizona Territory, 1887. A town built on lies, where the desert keeps its secrets, and the truth can kill you. But sometimes, the truth is the only thing that can set you free. Welcome to a story of betrayal, redemption, and the invisible threads that bind two souls across the divide of race, loss, and time. This is the story of Clara Whitman, and the night Clara Whitman hadn't spoken to God in 3 years, for months, and 16 days. Not since they buried her husband, Samuel, in the hard ground behind the church, where the desert wind carried away her prayers like dust. The homestead sat on the edge of nowhere, a small house, a barn, and a well that Samuel had dug with his own hands. 40 acres of scrubland that he'd sworn would bloom someday. Clara tended it alone now, her hands as weathered as the fence posts, her heart as dry as the earth beneath her feet. She was 29 years old and felt ancient. The people of Red Mesa called her the brave widow. They brought her casseroles wrapped in checkered cloth and spoke in hushed tones about her strength. But Clara knew the truth. She wasn't brave. She was just too stubborn to die. Samuel had been dead for exactly 3 years, for months, and 16 days. Shot down in Devil's Canyon while guiding a wagon train through Apache territory. At least, that's what Sheriff McAllister had told her when he rode up to her door with Samuel's blood-stained hat and eyes full of what looked like genuine sorrow. "I'm sorry, Clara," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. "We were too late. The Apache got to him first. Samuel died fighting, trying to protect innocent folks. He died a hero. A hero." The word had tasted like ashes in her mouth then, and it still did now. Clara fed the chickens as the sun died behind the mesa, painting the sky the color of old blood. The routine was sacred to her, the only thing that kept the darkness at bay. Chickens, garden, well, house. Chickens, garden, well, house. Day after day, the same prayers to a God who'd stopped listening. The storm came from nowhere, as desert storms do. One moment the sky was clear, the next it was black as sin and splitting with lightning. Clara had learned to read the weather. Like scripture, Samuel had taught her that. He'd taught her many things in their 5 years of marriage. How to shoot straight, how to read the land, how to find water in a wasteland, how to love without reservation. But he'd never taught her how to live without him. The rain hammered the roof like bullets, and Clara found herself at the window, watching the storm tear at her small world. The barn door was swinging in the wind, banging against the frame like a broken wing. Samuel would have secured that door. Samuel would have checked the animals, reinforced the chicken coop, and made sure everything was battened down tight. But Samuel was dead. Clara grabbed his old Winchester from above the mantel, the rifle that had belonged to his father and his father before him. The metal was cold in her hands, familiar as her own heartbeat. She'd become a fair shot in the 3 years since Samuel's death. A woman alone had to be. The mud sucked at her boots as she stepped into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her down, driving rain into her face like tiny knives. But Clara pressed on, because that's what Samuel would have done. That's what Samuel would have expected. The barn was dark as a tomb. Clara fumbled for the lantern that hung just inside the door, her fingers clumsy with cold and fear. The flame caught, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. And there, sprawled in the hay like a broken doll, was a man. Clara's first instinct was to scream. Her second was to run. Her third was to shoot. She did none of these things. Instead, she stood frozen, staring at the stranger who had somehow found his way into her sanctuary. He was young, maybe 30, with long black hair matted with blood and rain. Navajo, by the look of him. His skin was bronze, his features sharp and proud, even in unconsciousness. Blood pooled beneath him, dark as sin in the lamplight. A bullet hole in his chest leaked crimson onto the straw. He was dying, Clara realized. Dying slowly and alone. In her barn while the storm raged outside. She should have left him there. Should have walked away, barred the door, and let nature take its course. The people of Red Mesa would have praised her for it. The sheriff would have called her smart. But something held her back. Something in the stranger's face, peaceful despite his wounds. Something familiar, though she couldn't name what. And then his eyes opened. Dark eyes, deep as the desert night. Eyes that held no malice, no threat. Just recognition. Clara, he whispered, her name falling from his lips like a prayer, like a secret, like something precious and long lost. Clara raised the rifle, her hands shaking. How do you know my name? But the stranger's eyes had already closed again, and his breathing was so shallow she could barely see his chest rise and fall. Clara Whitman stood in her barn, rain drumming on the roof above, and faced the first real choice she'd made in 3 years, for months, and 16 days. Save him, or let him die. Clara had delivered 3 babies in her life. Helped Doc Morrison set broken bones, stitched cuts and cleaned wounds, and held dying men's hands while they whispered their last words to a God who might or might not have been listening. But she'd never worked on a gunshot wound. She never pulled a bullet from a man's chest while his life leaked out onto her barn floor. Damn you, she whispered to the unconscious stranger. Damn you for making me choose. But even as she cursed him, her hands were moving, setting down the rifle, gathering supplies, clean rags, the bottle of whiskey Samuel had been saving for their 6th anniversary, an anniversary that would never come. She'd learned basic medicine from Doc Morrison's wife, back when she thought she might have children of her own someday. Back when the future stretched ahead like an unbroken road instead of ending in a graveyard behind a church. Clara cut away the stranger's shirt with Samuel's hunting knife. The bullet had entered high on the left side of his chest, missing the heart, but doing God knew what damage inside. Blood frothed at the corners of his mouth. Not a good sign. Who are you? She whispered as she worked. What are you running from? The stranger stirred, his eyes fluttering open again. This time they focused on her face with startling clarity. Clara Whitman, he said, his voice barely audible above the storm. Samuel's wife. Clara's hands stilled. How do you know my husband's name? I knew him. The stranger coughed, specks of blood hitting Clara's apron. I knew. Samuel. Samuel's dead. 3 years now. I know. The stranger's eyes were sad and ancient despite his youth. I know how he died. I know who killed him. Clara's world tilted. The Apache killed my husband. In Devil's Canyon. Everyone knows that. The stranger tried to shake his head and winced with pain. No, not Apache. Not Devil's Canyon. Samuel died, trying to protect my father. They both died. For the same truth. Your father? Thomas Running Bear. The government scout. He was working with Samuel. Clara dropped the bloody rag she'd been holding. Thomas Running Bear. She remembered that name. Samuel had mentioned him. A Navajo scout who helped the territorial government track hostile tribes. A good man, Samuel had said. An honest man in a territory full of liars. Thomas Running Bear is dead too, she said. Killed by the same Apache war party that got Samuel. No. The stranger's voice was getting weaker, but his eyes burned with intensity. Listen to me, Clara. Listen before I die. Your husband, my father, they discovered something. Something that someone powerful couldn't let them live to tell. You're delirious. The blood loss, McAllister. The name fell between them like a stone into still water. Sheriff, McAllister. He's the one who killed them both. Clara recoiled as if she'd been slapped. That's impossible. Sheriff McAllister brought me word of Samuel's death. He organized the search party. He's been nothing but kind to me. Kind. The stranger almost smiled, but it looked more like a grimace. Yes, I bet he has been. How many times has he offered to buy your land, Clara? How many times has he told you it's too dangerous for a woman alone? Clara's mouth went dry, because it was true. All of it. McAllister had been kind, protective. He'd brought her food during the first terrible months after Samuel's death, offered to buy her homestead for a fair price, suggested she might be happier living in town, where decent folks could look after her. She'd always thought he was being charitable, a good Christian man helping a widow in her time of need. But now, what did Samuel and your father discover? She whispered. The stranger's breathing was getting more labored. Clara realized she'd stopped trying to treat his wound, mesmerized by his words. False Apache raids. McAllister's been staging them. Stealing cattle, killing innocents, blaming the tribes, collecting bounties from the territorial government. That's impossible, is it? The stranger's eyes found hers. How many Apache raids in the past 3 years? How many? Right after McAllister needed funding for more deputies, more weapons. Clara thought back. There had been several raids, always perfectly timed, it seemed, to justify McAllister's requests for more resources from the territorial capital, always leaving just enough survivors to spread the word about savage Apache brutality. My name is Joseph, the stranger continued. Joseph Running Bear. I've been hunting McAllister for 3 years, trying to gather proof. But he's smart, careful, covers his tracks. Then why are you here? Why now? Joseph reached inside his shirt with trembling fingers and pulled out something wrapped in oiled cloth. Because I finally found it. The proof. Samuel left something behind. Something he wanted you to have. Clara took the wrapped object. With shaking hands. Inside was a letter, written in Samuel's careful script, and something else. A small leather journal. Read it, Joseph whispered. Read it, and you'll know the truth. But before Clara could unfold the letter, they heard it. The sound that every frontier woman learned to fear. Horses, many horses, coming fast toward the homestead through the storm. Clara blew out the lantern and pressed herself against the barn wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through a gap in the boards, she could see riders approaching through the rain. At least 6 men, maybe more. Joseph tried to sit up, and immediately fell back with a groan. They found me, he whispered. Clara, you have to get away from here. If they find you helping me, shut up. Clara checked the load in Samuel's Winchester. 6 bullets. She'd become a decent shot, but she wasn't Annie Oakley. 6 bullets against however many men were out there. The horses stopped in front of the house. Clara heard boots splashing through puddles and voices calling out over the storm. Mrs. Whitman. Clara, are you in there? She recognized the voice. Sheriff McAllister. Her stomach turned to ice. We're tracking a dangerous fugitive, McAllister called. Navajo male, wounded. Goes by the name Joseph Running Bear. He's killed 3 men and stolen a horse. Might be looking for help. Clara pressed her back against the barn wall and closed her eyes. 3 men. Joseph had said he'd been hunting McAllister for proof of his crimes. How many people had the sheriff been forced to kill to protect his secret? Clara. McAllister's voice was closer now. She could hear boots on her front porch, fists pounding on her door. I know you're in there. Open up. Joseph grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. Don't let them take me alive, he whispered. Urgently. If McAllister gets his hands on me, I'll disappear. Just like the others who got too close to the truth. The others. A newspaper man from Tucson. A federal marshal who was asking questions. They all disappeared. Officially killed by Apache. Clara stared at him in horror. How many people had McAllister murdered? How many deaths had been blamed on Apache raiders who might not even exist? Mrs. Whitman. A new voice now. Deputy Carver, who'd always seemed like a decent man. Sheriff wants to make sure you're all right. Clara made a choice that would change everything. She handed Joseph the rifle. I'm going to talk to them. If things go bad, if they find you. I won't let them take me alive, Joseph repeated. But Clara, read Samuel's letter. Whatever happens to me, read that letter. The truth dies with me if you don't. Clara nodded and slipped out of the barn through the back door. The rain was still coming down hard, turning the yard into a muddy swamp. She circled around to the front of the house, making it look like she was coming from inside. Sheriff McAllister stood on her porch with 5 deputies, all of them armed and looking grim. In the lamplight from her kitchen window, McAllister's face looked different somehow. Harder, less kind than she remembered. Sheriff, Clara called out, trying to sound surprised and relieved. What are you doing out in this weather? Clara, thank God. McAllister stepped down from the porch, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. We've been chasing a killer. Most of the night. Dangerous man. I was worried he might have come this way. A killer. Clara let her voice rise with just the right amount of fear. What kind of killer? Navajo. Name of Joseph Running Bear. Son of that scout Thomas who died with your Samuel. Seems the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Clara felt ice in her veins. The casual racism, the lies wrapped in official authority. How had she never seen this side of McAllister before? I haven't seen anyone, Sheriff. Just me and the chickens. Mind if we take a look around? Just to be safe. It wasn't really a question. Clara nodded, knowing she had no choice. Of course, though I can't imagine why anyone would come way out here. A wounded animal always looks for a safe place to die, McAllister said, and there was something in his voice that made Clara's skin crawl. Sometimes they get desperate, do things they wouldn't normally do. The deputies spread out, checking the house, the chicken coop, and the shed. Clara watched with growing terror as they moved closer to the barn. You seem nervous, Clara, McAllister observed, stepping closer to her. Everything all right? Just the storm. Makes me jumpy. Reminds me of the night you brought word about Samuel. Something flickered in McAllister's eyes. That was a hard night. For both of us. I hated being the bearer of bad news. I know you did. You've been so kind to me since then. Always checking on me. Making sure I'm safe. A woman alone needs protection. This is dangerous country. Sheriff, Deputy Carver's voice cut through the rain. Barn's clear. Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief. Somehow, Joseph had hidden himself well enough to avoid detection. Well, McAllister said, touching the brim of his hat. Sorry to bother you, Clara, but if you see anything unusual, anything at all, you send word to town right away. This running bear is dangerous. Won't hesitate to kill a woman if it serves his purpose. I will, Sheriff. Thank you for checking on me. McAllister mounted his horse, but before riding away, he turned back to Clara. You know, Clara, that offer still stands. For your land. Fair price, cash money. It might be time to think about moving closer to town. For your own safety. I'll consider it, Sheriff. You do that. Clara watched the riders disappear. Into the storm, her heart still racing. When the sound of hooves had faded completely, she ran back to the barn. Joseph was hidden in an empty horse stall, covered with old blankets and hay. He was unconscious again, his breathing shallow. Clara knelt beside him and carefully unfolded Samuel's letter by lamplight. What she read there would shatter everything she thought she knew about her husband's death, her town, and herself. My beloved Clara, if you are reading this then, I am dead, and the man who killed me is probably consoling you in your grief. That thought makes me sick with rage, but I pray that somehow, someday, you will learn the truth. Sheriff McAllister is not the man he pretends to be. For the past 6 months, I have been working with Thomas Running Bear to document crimes that would shock the conscience of any decent person. McAllister has been staging Apache raids throughout the territory, using white men dressed as Indians to steal cattle, murder settlers, and terrorize the countryside. But the stolen cattle and the bounty money from the territorial government are not his real prize. Clara, my love, McAllister is clearing the land. Every family that flees, every homestead that's abandoned after an Apache attack, the land, becomes available for purchase at a fraction of its worth. McAllister and his associates are buying it all up, knowing that the railroad is coming through this territory within the next 5 years. When the railroad comes, Clara, the land we settlers fought so hard to claim, will be worth a fortune. McAllister will be one of the richest men in the territory, and it will all be built on blood and lies. Thomas and I have been gathering proof. We have photographs of the fake Apache camps. We have testimony from survivors who noticed things that didn't add up. White men's boots under Indian clothing and horses with U.S. Army brands being ridden by supposed Apache warriors. We have evidence of cattle sales in Tucson and Phoenix, cattle that was supposedly stolen by hostile Indians. We plan to take our evidence to the territorial governor next month. We thought we were careful. We thought we were safe. We were wrong. Clara, I suspect that Thomas and I are walking into a trap. I have sensed that we are being watched, followed. McAllister has been asking too many questions about our hunting trips into the desert. I fear that he knows what we have discovered. If something happens to me, Clara, you must get this evidence to the authorities. Not the local authorities. They may be corrupted too. Send it to the territorial governor in Prescott. Send it to the newspapers in Phoenix and Tucson. Send it to the federal marshal's office. But above all, my darling wife, be careful. McAllister is a charming man, a convincing liar, and a cold-blooded killer. He will try to comfort you, to gain your trust, and to convince you to sell him our land. Do not trust him. Do not let him into your heart or your home. I have hidden additional evidence in the old mine shaft at Copper Creek, the one we explored on our 2nd anniversary. Thomas has copies as well, and he has promised to get them to his son Joseph if anything happens to us. Joseph is a good man, Clara. If he comes to you, trust him. He carries his father's honor and my hope for justice. I love you more than life itself, Clara. More than the land, more than justice, more than truth. But I cannot live with the knowledge of McAllister's crimes and do nothing. Too many innocent people have died. Too many families have been destroyed. If I do not return from our next expedition, know that I died trying to make the world safer for you and for all the good people trying to build honest lives in this hard country. Your devoted husband, Samuel Whitman. P.S. I have sewn additional documents into the lining of my saddlebags. If you ever need more proof, look there. And Clara, in the cedar box under our bed, you will find a loaded Colt revolver and $50 in gold coins. I pray you never need either, but a woman alone must be prepared for anything. Forever yours, S. Clara read the letter 3 times before the words truly sank in. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the paper. Everything she had believed about Samuel's death was a lie. The Apache raids that had terrorized the territory. The kind sheriff who had been so helpful to her in her grief. The random tragedy that had stolen her husband from her. All lies. Samuel had died because he was a good man trying to do the right thing. He had died because he couldn't stand by and watch innocent people suffer for one man's greed. And Clara had spent 3 years being grateful to his killer. She looked at Joseph, still unconscious in the straw. This man had been carrying the truth for 3 years, trying to finish what his father and her husband had started. How many sleepless nights had he endured? How many close calls with McAllister's men? Clara opened Thomas Running Bear's journal and began to read by lamplight, page after page of careful documentation, dates, locations, and descriptions of the fake raids, lists of cattle brands and sale receipts, names of McAllister's accomplices, men Clara recognized, men she had considered pillars of the community. Deputy Carver was clean, according to the journal. So was Deputy Brooks. But the other 3 men wearing badges in Red Mesa were part of McAllister's conspiracy. They had helped stage the raids, split the profits, and kept quiet about the murders. One entry, dated just 2 weeks before Samuel's death, made Clara's blood run cold. Samuel believes McAllister is beginning to suspect our investigation. We have noticed riders following us on our last 2 trips to gather evidence. Samuel wants to accelerate our timeline. Take what proof we have to the authorities immediately. I have advised caution, but Samuel is determined. He says he cannot sleep at night knowing what we know, and I understand his urgency. Good men should not have to live with such knowledge in silence. If something happens to us, I have told my son Joseph to find Samuel's wife. Clara Whitman is a good woman, Samuel says, strong and brave. If we do not return, she will know what to do with the truth. Clara closed the journal and looked at Joseph again. His breathing seemed stronger now, more regular. The bleeding from his chest wound had stopped. She made another choice that would change everything. Clara Whitman was going to help Joseph Running Bear finish what her husband had started. She was going to bring Sheriff McAllister to justice, even if it killed her. But first, she needed to make sure Joseph lived long enough to help her do it. Clara had never performed surgery before, but she'd watched Doc Morrison remove a bullet from a cowboy's shoulder 2 years ago. The technique wasn't complicated. The hard part was having steady hands and a strong stomach. She had both. Joseph drifted in and out of consciousness as Clara worked. She'd moved him into the house after the sheriff's visit, reasoning that McAllister was unlikely to return the same night. The kitchen table was sturdy and the light was better there. Hold still, she murmured, more to herself than to Joseph. The bullet was lodged deep in the muscle of his chest, close to the shoulder blade. She could feel it with the tip of her knife, a hard lump that didn't belong. Joseph's eyes fluttered open. Clara, I'm here. I'm getting the bullet out. Did you read the letter? I read it. Clara's voice was grim. Samuel and your father were murdered. McAllister killed them both. The evidence, I have it. Your father's journal, Samuel's letter. But Joseph, we need more. We need proof that will convince a territorial judge. Something that can't be dismissed as the ravings of a grieving widow and a half-breed outlaw. Joseph winced, whether from pain or her words. Clara couldn't tell. There is more. In my saddlebags. Photographs. Witness statements. Even a confession. A confession? From whom? One of McAllister's men. Jake Morrison. He got religion. After his brother died in a real Apache raid down south. Started talking about wanting to make amends. I found him in Tucson, dying of consumption. He told me everything before he died. Clara's hands stilled. Jake Morrison. She knew that name. He'd been one of McAllister's deputies until about 6 months ago, when he suddenly left town. People said he'd gone south to visit family. Where are your saddlebags? I hid them, in the old mine shaft at Copper Creek. Same place. Samuel hid his evidence. Of course, Copper Creek was where Clara and Samuel had gone on their second anniversary. It was where Samuel had kissed her for the first time after their wedding, where he'd promised her that someday they'd have children who would splash in that creek and grow up free and safe. I know the place, Clara said softly. The bullet came, free with a wet, sucking sound. Joseph gasped and gripped the edges of the table, but he didn't cry out. Clara cleaned the wound with whiskey and stitched it closed with thread meant for mending quilts. You'll live, she said when she was finished, but you need rest, and food, and time to heal. We don't have time. McAllister will be back. He's too smart to believe I just disappeared into the desert. Clara helped Joseph to Samuel's chair by the fire and wrapped him in her heaviest quilt. In the firelight, he looked younger than his years, vulnerable despite the strength she'd seen in his eyes. Tell me about your father, she said, settling into her own chair across from him. Samuel mentioned him in his letters home, but I never got to meet him. Joseph was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. My father was born during the Long Walk, he said finally. Do you know about the Long Walk? Clara shook her head. 1864, the U.S. Army forced our people to march 300 miles to a prison camp called Bosque Redondo. Men, women, children, and elders. Thousands of us. My grandmother died on that march. My grandfather lost 3 fingers to frostbite. They kept us there for 4 years, on land that couldn't grow food, with water that made people sick. Clara listened in horror. She'd heard vague stories about Indian relocations, but never the details. Never the human cost. My father was 5 years old when they finally let our people return home. But home was gone. Our sheep were dead, our crops destroyed, and our sacred places desecrated. My father grew up in a world that had been broken and never properly healed. How did he become a scout for the army? Survival. He learned English and learned to read and write. He thought that if he helped the white authorities catch the truly hostile tribes, maybe they would leave the peaceful Navajo alone. Maybe there could be coexistence instead of constant war. Joseph's voice was bitter now. He was wrong, of course. To the white settlers, all Indians were the same. Hostile or peaceful, we were all obstacles to be removed. But my father kept trying to build bridges, kept trying to prove that we could live in peace. Is that why he helped Samuel? Yes. When he discovered that McAllister was staging fake Apache raids, he was enraged. Not just because innocent people were dying, but because every fake raid made real peace that much harder to achieve. Every time a white family was killed by men pretending to be Apache, it justified more hatred and more violence against all Indian people. Clara felt a wave of shame wash over her. How many times had she heard people in Red Mesa talking about the Indian problem? How many times had she nodded along when someone suggested that all the tribes should be moved to reservations for everyone's safety? Your father sounds like a good man. He was. And he died believing that the truth would matter. That if good people like your husband could see past their prejudices, maybe there was hope for all of us. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to coals. Outside, the storm was finally passing, but Clara could still hear wind rattling the windows. Joseph, she said finally, when this is over, when we've brought McAllister to justice, what will you do? I don't know. I've been hunting him for so long. I haven't thought beyond that. Maybe go back to my mother's people. Try to live a normal life. Do you think that's possible? A normal life? Joseph looked at her across the firelight. Do you? Clara considered the question. 3 days ago, her biggest worry had been weather. The chickens were laying enough eggs to trade for supplies in town. Now she was harboring a fugitive, planning to expose a murderous sheriff, and sitting in her kitchen talking to a Navajo man as if he were an old friend. I think normal is overrated, she said finally. I think maybe what we really need is just honesty. A life built on truth instead of lies. Even if the truth is dangerous? Especially then. Joseph smiled for the first time since she'd found him in her barn. It transformed his whole face, made him look like the young man he really was instead of the hardened fugitive he'd been forced to become. Samuel chose well when he married you, Clara Whitman. I hope so. I hope I'm worthy of what he died for. You are. And tomorrow, we're going to prove it. Dawn came gray and cold, the desert washed clean by the night's storm. Clara woke in, her chair by the dead fire, a quilt pulled up to her chin. Joseph was gone. Panic seized her for a moment until she heard sounds from the barn. She found him there, saddling her mare with careful, practiced movements. His chest was still bandaged, but he moved without the labored breathing of the night before. You should be resting, Clara said. We don't have time for rest. McAllister will figure out I didn't leave the territory. He'll be back with more men, and next time they won't just take a casual look around. Clara nodded. She'd reached the same conclusion in the sleepless hours before dawn. How long to reach Copper Creek? 3 hours hard ride. But Clara, Joseph paused in his saddling. You don't have to come. Give me directions to the mine shaft. Let me retrieve the evidence. You can stay here and maintain your cover. When this is over, no one will blame you for anything. No. Clara's voice was firm. This is my fight now. Samuel died for this truth, and I'm going to see it through to the end. It's dangerous. If McAllister catches us, we'll be in the same boat whether I'm here or there. At least at Copper Creek, we'll have the evidence to fight back with. Joseph studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Samuel was right about you. You are brave. I'm not brave. I'm angry. There's a difference. Clara saddled her husband's horse, a sturdy gelding named Justice that Samuel had broken himself. The irony of the name wasn't lost on her. They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern mesa, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Clara had packed supplies, water, food, ammunition, and Samuel's spare rifle. She'd also brought the cedar box from under her bed, with its loaded Colt revolver and gold coins. If they were going to make a stand, they might as well be properly armed. The country between Red Mesa and Copper Creek was rough. Broken arroyos, stands of mesquite and palo verde, and red rock formations that looked like ancient monuments to forgotten gods. Clara had ridden this trail many times with Samuel, but never with a fugitive, never with the weight of dangerous knowledge in her saddlebags. Tell me about the confession, she said as they rode. Jake Morrison's deathbed statement. Jake was there the night they killed your husband and my father. He described the whole thing. How McAllister lured them to Devil's Canyon with a false message about Apache movement. How he and his men ambushed them. How they made it look like an Indian attack. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. Samuel trusted McAllister. He would have ridden into that canyon without suspicion. According to Jake, your husband figured out the trap at the last moment. He fought back, trying to protect my father. But they were outnumbered 6-2. Did they suffer? Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Jake said McAllister made it quick. He's a killer, but not a torturer. Samuel and my father died fighting for what they believed in. It was small comfort, but Clara took what she could get. At least Samuel hadn't died afraid or alone. They stopped to rest the horses at a small spring about halfway to Copper Creek. The desert was waking up around them, lizards sunning themselves on rocks, a red-tailed hawk circling overhead, and the distant call of a coyote. It's beautiful, Joseph said, gazing at the landscape. Samuel always said that. He loved this country, said it was hard but honest. Like him. Clara studied Joseph's profile as he drank from the spring. In daylight, away from blood and lamplight and fear, she could see the man he really was. Strong features, intelligent eyes, and hands that were gentle with the horses despite their obvious strength. Under different circumstances, in a different world, he might have been a teacher, or a rancher, or a lawyer. Instead, he'd spent 3 years of his life hunting a killer. What was your father's dream? She asked. Before all this, what did he want to do with his life? He wanted to be a bridge between our people and yours. He thought understanding could replace fear, given time and patience. Do you think he was right? I want to believe he was, but I've seen too much hatred, too much violence. Sometimes I think the only language anyone understands is force. But you're not using force. You're using truth. Truth backed up by evidence. Evidence that might require force to protect. Clara understood. They were riding toward a confrontation that might well end in violence. McAllister wouldn't give up his secret empire without a fight, and he had the entire apparatus of law enforcement behind him. Joseph, if this goes badly, if we don't make it out of this alive, what happens to the evidence? I've made arrangements. There's a priest in Tucson, Father Miguel Santos. He's been helping Indian families navigate the legal system. If I don't contact him within the next week, he'll send copies of everything to the territorial governor and the federal marshal's office. Good. Samuel would approve of that. They remounted and continued toward Copper Creek, the sun climbing. Higher in the desert sky, Clara found herself thinking about the last time she and Samuel had made this ride. It had been spring then, wildflowers blooming in hidden canyons, the creek running full from mountain snowmelt. They'd been so young, so full of hope for the future. That future was gone now, but maybe, just maybe, they could build something new from the ashes. Something honest. Something worthy of the men who had died for it. Clara, Joseph said as they crested a rise and saw Copper Creek spread out below them. Whatever happens today, I want you to know, helping me, fighting for this truth, it's the most courageous thing I've ever seen anyone do. I'm not doing it to be courageous. I'm doing it because it's right. That's what makes it courageous. They rode down into the canyon, toward the old mine shaft where Samuel had hidden his evidence 3 years ago, toward the truth that had killed him, toward whatever justice two unlikely allies could forge in a land that had forgotten the meaning of the word. The old mine shaft at Copper Creek had been abandoned for at least a decade before Clara and Samuel first explored it. Some optimistic prospector had blasted into the canyon wall, chasing rumors of silver that never materialized. What remained was a tunnel about 50 feet deep, shored up with rotting timbers and littered with rusted mining equipment. Samuel had been fascinated by it, imagining the dreams and disappointments of the men who had dug it. Clara had been more practical, noting that it would make excellent storage for supplies during their camping trips. Neither of them had imagined it would become a hiding place for evidence of murder. Joseph led the way into the tunnel, carrying a lantern from Clara's supplies. The air was cool and damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth and rust. Their footsteps echoed off the rock walls, and Clara found herself remembering the last time she'd been here. Right there, she said, pointing to a natural shelf in the rock wall. That's where Samuel always put our food supplies to keep them, away from animals. Joseph raised the lantern and examined the shelf. Behind a pile of old mining debris, they found what they were looking for, a leather satchel wrapped in oiled canvas, exactly as Samuel had described in his letter. Clara's hands shook as she opened the satchel. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Images of men in war paint and feathers who were clearly white under their disguises. Pictures of cattle bearing territorial brands being driven by riders in Indian costume. A photograph of McAllister himself, taken from a distance, supervising what was obviously a staged raid. My God, Clara whispered. Samuel actually did it. He got proof. Joseph had found his own cache, hidden deeper in the tunnel. He returned with another satchel and a small wooden box. Jake Morrison's written confession, he said, showing Clara a stack of papers, signed and witnessed by Father Santos in Tucson. And this. He opened the wooden box, revealing a sheriff's badge. But not just any badge. This one was bent and bloodstained. Samuel's badge? Clara asked, confused. No, Jake Morrison's. He gave it to me when he made his confession. Said he couldn't bear to die wearing a symbol of everything he'd done wrong. Clara studied the bloodstained badge. Morrison had been wearing it the night Samuel and Thomas Running Bear died. The blood might well be her husband's. There's more, Joseph continued, pulling out another bundle of papers. Maps showing McAllister's land purchases over the past 4 years. Bills of sale for stolen cattle. Even correspondence with his partners. In Tucson and Phoenix. Partners. This isn't just a local operation, Clara. McAllister is part of a larger conspiracy. Businessmen in 3 territories are working together to clear out small ranchers and Indian tribes, preparing for the railroad boom. Clara felt the scope of the conspiracy settling over her like a weight. This wasn't just about her husband's murder or even McAllister's crimes. This was about a systematic effort to steal the entire American Southwest through violence and lies. How many people have died for their greed? She asked. According to these documents, At least 40 families. Maybe more. Clara closed her eyes and tried to imagine 40 families. Husbands and wives like her and Samuel. Children who would never grow up. Dreams that would never be fulfilled. All sacrificed so that rich men could become richer. We have to stop them, she said. We will. This evidence is enough to bring down McAllister and his partners. But Clara, we have to be smart about how we use it. If we just ride into Red Mesa and start making accusations, we'll end up dead, just like Samuel and your father. Exactly. We need to get this evidence to someone with the power and integrity to act on it. Someone beyond McAllister's reach. The territorial governor? Or the federal marshal? Maybe both. Clara gathered the photographs and documents, organizing them carefully. Some would go to the authorities. Others would go to newspapers. A few copies would be hidden in new locations, insurance against future attempts to suppress the truth. Joseph, there's something else we need to consider. What? McAllister isn't going to just give up when this evidence becomes public. He'll run, or he'll fight. If he runs, he might escape justice. If he fights, people will die. Innocent. People who get caught in the crossfire. Clara nodded. Red Mesa is full of good people who have no idea what their sheriff has been doing. If McAllister decides to make a last stand, they'll suffer for it. So what do you suggest? Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking. Outside the mine shaft, she could hear the creek babbling over stones, the same sound that had lulled her to sleep on camping trips with Samuel. The same sound that had been there the night he decided to hide evidence that would eventually expose his killer. We confront him, she said finally. What? We go back to Red Mesa. We confront McAllister. Directly, in front of witnesses. We give him a chance to confess, to surrender peacefully. And if he refuses, we'll have a war on our hands. Maybe, but at least it will be an honest war. People will know what they're fighting for. Joseph stared at her in amazement. Clara, that's incredibly dangerous. McAllister has deputies, allies, and resources. We'd be walking into a trap. Everything we've done so far has been dangerous. But think about it, Joseph. If we can expose McAllister in front of the whole town, if we can show people the evidence, make them understand what he's done, maybe we can turn his own people against him. And if we can't, then we die fighting for the truth, just like Samuel and your father did. But at least we die with honor. Joseph was quiet for a long time, considering her words. Finally, he nodded. Samuel chose well when he married you, Clara Whitman. You have the heart of a warrior. I have the heart of a woman who's tired of living in fear. They spent another hour in the mine shaft, organizing the evidence and planning their approach. When they finally emerged, the sun was directly overhead, and Clara could see dust clouds on the horizon. Riders, coming from the direction of Red Mesa. McAllister, she asked. Joseph shaded his eyes and studied the approaching dust. Could be. Or it could be innocent travelers. Do we run? No. We're committed now. If it's McAllister, we face him. If they're innocent people, we warn them. Clara checked the loads in both her rifles and made sure the Colt revolver was secure in her belt. Joseph did the same with his weapons. Whatever happens, she said, we stick together. Whatever happens, Joseph agreed. They mounted their horses and rode out of the canyon, carrying the evidence that would either free Red Mesa from a killer's grip or get them both killed in the attempt. Behind them, Copper Creek continued its ancient song, indifferent to human struggles, eternal as the desert itself. The riders were indeed McAllister's men, 6 deputies riding hard toward Copper Creek. Clara and Joseph had perhaps 10 minutes before they would be spotted. We could still run, Joseph said, checking his rifle. Head south to Tucson, get this evidence to the federal marshal, and leave the people of Red Mesa to live under McAllister's lies for God knows how long? No, we end this today. Clara spurred her horse toward town, Joseph beside her. They rode hard across the desert, raising a dust cloud of their own, racing to reach Red Mesa before McAllister's men could intercept them. The town appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts, clustered around a central plaza. Clara had lived on the outskirts of this community for 8 years, but she'd never truly seen it until now. Never noticed how the sheriff's office dominated the main street or how many of the buildings bore McAllister's name as owner or partner. They rode straight to the plaza, where the weekly market was in full swing. Farmers and ranchers, shopkeepers and their wives, children playing between the stalls. The normal life of a frontier town, built on a foundation of lies. Clara stood up in her stirrups and called out in a voice that carried across the square. "People of Red Mesa, I have something to tell you about Sheriff McAllister." Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Clara recognized many of the faces. Mrs. Patterson from the general store, Doc Morrison and his wife, the banker Henderson, and Pastor Williams from the church where Samuel was buried. Clara Whitman. Pastor Williams stepped forward, concern in his voice. "What are you doing here? And who is this man?" "This is Joseph Running Bear, son of Thomas Running Bear, the scout who was murdered 3 years ago along with my husband." A murmur ran through the crowd. Joseph's presence was clearly making people nervous. Most had never seen him before, but everyone knew the story of the dangerous Navajo outlaw who had been terrorizing the territory. "Clara," Doc Morrison said gently, "you're not thinking clearly. This man is a killer. He's wanted for murder. The only killer here is Sheriff McAllister." Clara's voice rang across the plaza. Samuel and Thomas Running Bear were murdered because they discovered that McAllister has been staging fake Apache raids, stealing cattle, and killing innocent people for profit. The crowd erupted. Some people shouted denials, others demanded proof, and a few began backing away from Joseph as if he might attack them at any moment. "She's been living alone too long," someone called out. "Grief has made her crazy." "I have proof." Clara held up the leather satchel. "Photographs, documents, witness statements, everything you need to see the truth." But before she could say more, the sound of hoofbeats thundered into the plaza. Sheriff McAllister arrived with his deputies, guns drawn, surrounding Clara and Joseph. "Step away from the killer, Clara," McAllister commanded. "He's filled your head with lies." "The only lies here are yours, McAllister." Clara kept her rifle, trained on the sheriff, even as his men aimed their weapons at her. "Tell these people about the fake Apache raids. Tell them about the stolen cattle. Tell them how you murdered my husband. You're talking crazy, woman. Grief and isolation have made you lose your mind." But Clara could see doubt creeping into some faces in the crowd. Pastor Williams was studying McAllister with new eyes. Doc Morrison looked troubled. Even some of the deputies seemed uncertain. "Then explain this." Clara pulled out one of the photographs, a clear image of McAllister, supervising men in fake Indian costumes. "Explain why you're dressed like an Apache in this picture while supposedly hunting Apache raiders." She held the photograph high enough for the crowd to see. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the plaza. "That's a fake," McAllister snarled. "Made by this savage and his accomplices." "Is it?" Joseph spoke for the first time, his voice calm and clear. "Then how do you explain this?" He held up Jake Morrison's bloodstained badge. "This belonged to Deputy Morrison, the man you sent away, when he started having second thoughts about your crimes. He made a full confession before he died, Sheriff. Told a priest in Tucson everything about the night you murdered Samuel Whitman and my father. Morrison was drunk half the time and crazy the rest. No one will believe anything he said." But Clara could see the fear in McAllister's eyes now. The casual confidence was cracking. "Maybe they'll believe this, then." Clara pulled out Samuel's letter and began reading in a voice that carried to every corner of the plaza. "My beloved Clara, if you are reading this, then I am dead, and the man who killed me is probably consoling you in your grief." As Clara read Samuel's accusations, detailed and specific, the crowd grew quieter. These people had known Samuel Whitman. They'd respected him, trusted his judgment. His words from beyond the grave carried weight that even McAllister couldn't dismiss. When Clara finished reading, the plaza was silent except for the wind and the distant sound of children who had stopped playing to listen. Pastor Williams stepped forward. "Sheriff, these are serious accusations. Perhaps you should mind your own business, preacher." McAllister's facade was crumbling completely now. "All of you go home. This is a law enforcement matter." "What law?" Clara demanded. "Your law? The law that lets you murder innocent people and steal their land? The law that blames Apache raiders for crimes committed by white men in disguise." Deputy Carver, one of the men Joseph's father had identified as honest, lowered his weapon. "Sheriff, maybe we should look at this evidence. If there's even a chance." "Shut up, Carver. These are lies spread by a savage and a crazy woman. But it was too late. The doubt had spread through the crowd like wildfire. Clara could see it in their faces, the pieces clicking together, the inconsistencies they'd seen, and the convenient explanations they'd accepted without question. "How many Apache raids in the past 3 years, Sheriff?" Doc Morrison called out. "How many? Right when you needed more funding from the territorial government. How many families have been driven off their land?" Mrs. Patterson added. "Land that you or your friends just happened to buy at bargain prices." McAllister looked around the plaza, seeing his control slipping away. His remaining loyal deputies, the 3 corrupted ones, were closer to having their hands on their guns. "Enough," McAllister roared. "I've spent 4 years protecting this town, building something worthwhile out of nothing. And this is how you repay me? By listening to lies from a savage and a crazy widow." "Protecting us from what?" Clara asked quietly. "From Apache raiders that you created? From threats that existed only in your imagination? Or protecting us from the truth?" McAllister's hand moved to his gun. The corrupted deputies followed suit. Honest men like Carver and Brooks found themselves facing a choice: loyalty to their sheriff or loyalty to the truth. The confrontation that would determine Red Mesa's future was about to begin. "Draw your weapon, savage." McAllister snarled at Joseph. "Let's settle this like men." "No." Joseph kept his rifle lowered. "I won't give you an excuse to call this self-defense. If you want to kill me, Sheriff, you'll have to do it in front of all these witnesses. You'll have to show them exactly what kind of man you really are." The plaza had become a powder keg. Half the townspeople were backing away, trying to get their families to safety. The other half pressed closer, unwilling to miss what might be the most important moment in Red Mesa's history. "You're under arrest, Joseph Running Bear," McAllister declared, "for the murder of 3 men and the theft of a horse." "What 3 men?" Clara demanded. "Name them. Give us dates, locations, and witnesses." McAllister's mouth worked, but no words came. Because there were no 3 men. There was no theft. The charges had been fabricated, just like everything else. "I'll name 3 men for you," Joseph said. Quietly: Samuel Whitman, Thomas Running Bear, and Jake Morrison. 3 good men who died because they threatened your empire of lies. Morrison died of consumption, after you drove him out of town for asking too many questions. After you made sure he could never come back to tell what he knew. Deputy Carver stepped forward, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. "Sheriff, I want to see that evidence. All of it. These people deserve to know the truth." "The truth?" McAllister laughed bitterly. "The truth is that I built this town. I brought order to chaos. I made it safe for decent white families to live and prosper. By murdering innocent people." Clara's voice rose. "By stealing land. By spreading hatred and fear. By doing what was necessary." McAllister roared. "Do you think civilization comes free? Do you think you can build something worthwhile without getting your hands dirty?" The mask was completely off now. The charming, protective sheriff was gone, replaced by the cold-blooded killer he'd always been underneath. "I've done what weak men like your husband couldn't do," McAllister continued. "I've taken this worthless desert and turned it into something valuable. When the railroad comes through here in 3 years, Red Mesa will be one of the richest towns in the territory. And it will be because I had the courage to do what was necessary." "Necessary?" Pastor Williams stepped forward, his face pale with shock. "Murder is necessary? Theft is necessary? Bearing false witness against innocent people is necessary. Spare me your sermons, preacher. Your God doesn't run cattle or stop Apache raids or bring the railroad to town." "I do." Clara saw her moment. While McAllister was ranting, she pulled out the bundle of land deeds and contracts from the evidence satchel. "Show them the railroad contracts, Sheriff. Show them how you and your partners have been buying up land for pennies on the dollar, knowing exactly where the tracks will go. Show them the letters from your business associates in Tucson and Phoenix." She began reading from the documents, her voice carrying across the plaza. "Sheriff McAllister, the Morrison Ranch is cleared as requested. The family relocated to California, suggesting Apache raid on the Henderson property next month too. Complete our holdings in Section 12. Signed, R. Blackwood, Tucson Land Development Company." The crowd erupted. People shouted questions, demands, and accusations. Clara saw Mrs. Henderson grip her husband's arm. Their ranch was in Section 12. Sheriff McAllister. Excellent work on the freight wagon incident. Territorial, completely convinced of Apache involvement. Bounty payment of $500 enclosed. The next target should be the Whitman homestead. Water rights to Copper Creek essential for railroad construction. Signed, Senator J. Phillips, Phoenix. Clara's voice broke on the last sentence. Her own home had been targeted. Samuel's death hadn't been just about silencing him. It had been about stealing their land. The crowd was in chaos now. Some people were crying, others shouting for McAllister's arrest. But the corrupt deputies had their guns drawn, and the honest ones were outnumbered. Enough. McAllister drew his pistol and aimed it directly at Clara's heart. I've heard enough lies for one day. But before he could pull the trigger, Deputy Carver tackled him from behind. The gun went off, the bullet going wild, shattering a window in the general store. The plaza exploded into violence. McAllister's corrupt deputies opened fire on the crowd. Honest lawmen fired back. Townspeople dove for cover behind wagons and storefronts. Joseph pushed Clara behind an overturned cart and returned fire with his rifle. Are you hit? No. But we have to end this before innocent people get killed. Clara could see children crying, women screaming, and men she'd known for years shooting at each other across the plaza. This wasn't the clean resolution she'd hoped for. This was chaos, and it was partly her fault. McAllister, she called out. End this. Surrender, and no one else has to die. But McAllister was beyond reason now. He'd killed Deputy Carver and was using the sheriff's office as a fortress, firing at anyone who moved in the plaza. You want the truth, he screamed. Here's the truth. I own this town. I built it, and I'll burn it down before I let a savage and a crazy woman destroy what I've created. Clara made a decision that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. She stood up, exposing herself to McAllister's gun, and walked into the center of the plaza. Samuel, she called out to the sky. If you can hear me, if you're watching, I need your help. I need your courage. McAllister aimed his gun at her heart. Say goodbye, Clara. But the shot, when it came, wasn't from McAllister's gun. Joseph Running Bear, carrying his father's rifle and his father's honor, had made the shot that ended Sheriff McAllister's reign of terror forever. The plaza fell silent except for the wind and the crying of children. Sheriff McAllister lay dead in the doorway of his office, killed by a single shot from the son of the man he'd murdered 3 years ago. Clara stood in the center of the plaza, still holding the evidence that had started it all. Around her, the people of Red Mesa emerged from their hiding places, staring at the destruction their ignorance had allowed. Deputy Brooks, the senior, honest lawman still alive, approached Joseph with his hands visible but not threatening. Son, I'm going to have to ask you to put down that rifle. Joseph nodded and carefully placed his father's weapon on the ground. I know, Deputy. I'm ready to face whatever justice you think is appropriate. Justice. Clara stepped between them. This man just saved our town from a murderer. If anyone deserves justice, it's the families McAllister destroyed. Brooks looked around the plaza, at the bullet-scarred buildings, the overturned carts, and the bloodstains in the dust. There's going to have to be an investigation, a formal inquiry. The territorial authorities will want to know what happened here. Then show them this. Clara handed him the complete collection of evidence. Show them the photographs, the confessions, and the contracts. Show them exactly what kind of man we've been calling sheriff for the past 4 years. Pastor Williams approached, his face grave but determined. I'll testify to what I heard here today. Sheriff McAllister's own words, his own confession of guilt. As will I, Doc Morrison added. And I suspect most of the town will do the same, once they fully understand what's been done in their name. Clara looked around the plaza at the faces of her neighbors. She saw shame there, and anger, and grief. But she also saw something else, a determination to do better, to build something honest from the wreckage of McAllister's lies. What happens now? Someone called out. Clara looked at Joseph, then at the evidence in Deputy Brooks' hands, then at the people who would have to live with the consequences of this day. Now we tell the truth, she said simply. All of it. To the territorial governor, to the newspapers, to anyone who will listen. We make sure that Samuel Whitman and Thomas Running Bear and all the other victims didn't die for nothing. And then we build something worthy of their sacrifice. A town based on truth instead of lies. A community where people of all colors can live in peace. A place where the strong protect the weak instead of preying on them. Joseph stepped forward. I'd like to help with that, if you'll have me. My father believed that your people and mine could live together in peace. I'd like to prove he was right. There was a long moment of silence. Then Pastor Williams extended his hand to Joseph. Thomas Running Bear was a good man. So was Samuel Whitman. If you're willing to work for the same dream they died for, then you're welcome in Red Mesa. One by one, other townspeople stepped forward. Not all of them. Some would never accept the truth, never move past their prejudices. But enough. Enough. To make a difference. Clara walked to the spot where McAllister had fallen and looked down at the man who had killed her husband. She felt no satisfaction in his death, no sense of completion. Justice wasn't revenge. Justice was the chance to build something better. Clara. Joseph approached quietly. What will you do now? Clara looked around the plaza one more time, then at the man who had helped her find the truth. I'm going to live, Joseph. For the first time in 3 years, I'm going to really live. And I'm going to make sure that everyone knows the story of what happened here today. The whole story. The whole story. The fake raids, the murders, the conspiracy, but also the courage of ordinary people who chose truth over comfort. The story of a Navajo man and a white woman who refused to let lies triumph over justice. Some people won't like that story. Then they can write their own. But this is the truth, and the truth deserves to be told. As the sun set over Red Mesa, Clara Whitman and Joseph Running Bear stood together in the plaza, surrounded by evidence of both human cruelty and human courage. They had lost much: Samuel, Thomas, the innocence of a community, the simple certainties that made life easier to bear. But they had gained something too. They had gained the truth. And sometimes, Clara reflected, the truth is the only foundation strong enough to build a real future on. The desert wind carried their voices across the territory that night, telling a story that some would try to suppress but could never entirely silence. The story of Red Mesa. The story of justice found and evil exposed. The story of two unlikely allies who proved that the bonds of honor and truth are stronger than the divisions of race or the barriers of prejudice. It was a story worth telling, a story worth dying for, a story worth living for. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is let go of the stories that comfort us and embrace the truths that set us free. Clara Whitman learned that love doesn't always look like holding on. Sometimes, it looks like having the courage to let go of lies and fight for justice, even when the cost is everything you thought you knew about your world. Joseph Running Bear learned that honor isn't inherited. It's chosen, day by day, decision by decision. And that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with guns, but with truth. The people of Red Mesa learned that a community built on lies will eventually crumble, but a community committed to truth, however painful, can weather any storm. What about you? If you discovered that everything you believed about your life was built on someone else's lies, would you have the courage to tear it all down and start over? If you found evidence of injustice in your own community, would you speak up, even if it cost you everything? Clara and Joseph's story reminds us that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. It's about choosing truth over comfort, justice over safety, and hope over despair. If this story moved you, if it made you think about courage and truth and the bonds that unite us across all our differences, please subscribe to this channel for more stories from the American frontier. Leave a comment below about a time when you had to choose between comfort and truth. And share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that even in the darkest times, good people can make a difference. The frontier wasn't just a place. It was an idea. The idea that ordinary people could build something extraordinary if they had the courage to face the truth about themselves and their world. That frontier still exists in every choice we make, every stand we take, and every truth we tell. What will you build with your courage?